All right, we're ready to go. Today is June 3rd, 2019. This is a planning and zoning meeting for the city of Newberry. We will begin with a call to order, approval of the agenda, pledge of allegiance, approval of the May 6th minutes, announcements, old business, new business. We have item A, welcome of new members. B, legislative public hearing, LDR 1906, which has to do with the agricultural zoning and to allow for fully enclosed small animal boarding facilities within the agricultural zoning district. The next two items, items C and D, have been pulled by staff, so we only have two items on today's new business. 8 is topics from members for discussion, and 9 is adjournment. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda as changed?
Motion to approve.
I have a second? Anybody want to make a second? I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. Okay, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the next item is approval of last month's minutes. Has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes and see that they are all in order? Are there any updates or changes to the minutes? Have a motion to accept the minutes as printed.
Motion to approve
Motion.
as printed.
And a second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion or changes? Then all in favor of approval of the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries. Announcements. I think planning announced that we will elect our officers at the next meeting. So for the new members, keep that in mind, that our next meeting will be the first Monday in July, I believe, and we'll elect new officers then.
Mr. Mayor,
go ahead.
I just want to announce I will miss the next planning and zoning. I'll be on our trip to Europe with my students that Monday.
Okay.
But I'll think of you as I'm over there in Italy.
This is a chance to elect Jordan for every committee that he's gone. Okay, have a great time. Are there any other announcements before we get into the business? Okay, the first item of new business is welcome to the new members. Gavin Johnson, would you like to say a word of introduction?
Just excited to be here and hopefully, excited to make a good impact on the city and the way that we grow. So,
okay, well, we are glad to have you with us. Linda Woodcock.
I'm just glad to be here, period. But
well,
yes, thank you.
It's good to have you with us, and if there's anything the other members of the board can do to help you, be cognizant of the sunshine laws. As far we can't talk to each other on the phone outside of this meeting about planning business, but if there's anything we can do to help you while we're here in the sunshine, we'll be glad to help you. Jordan, do you have anything, word for the new members?
Nope, I appreciate anybody that comes and donates their time. As Miss Linda said, y'all don't get paid, so it's true community service. And as Bill said, I'm here. I'm not a voting member, so I'm outside the sunshine. If you need a sounding board just to talk off of, I think everybody has my cell phone in the entire city, so feel free to use it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. You can, if you don't understand anything, you can talk to staff and you can talk to Jordan. We just can't talk to each other outside of the sunshine. And to the attorneys, yes, you can talk to the attorneys. Thank you.
I just wanted to staff wanted to welcome the new members as well. We were really fortunate this time around. For the first time, I think, in the 5 years since I've been here, we had more candidates than we could actually fill, more than we had positions, and so it's really nice to see so much increased activity. And we thank you for being willing to spend your time at least one Monday every month. And thank you. We've got some training materials we'll be handing out later, and also we just so you know, staff is looking for some training opportunities specific to planning and zoning. they've been offered in the past, and we're going to see about bringing the instructor actually out here to Newberry to try to make it easier for everybody to attend. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments concerning new members? Okay, the next item on the agenda is legislative public hearing for LDR 1906. And I think, Madam Attorney, would you like to read it, read the title so we can get the motion on the floor for discussion?
I'd be happy to. This is. Sorry about that. I'll talk loud instead.
If you have any electronics by your mic, or if you have any mics that are on, that generally is the culprit for that. So
Mine's always went on, so.
turn your cell phone.
My mic is not on now. I turned it off after that lovely noise.
I have mine on.
I turned it down.
Sometimes it's just that one will do it, one on. All right, one more time.
I'm scared. Okay.
And let me just,
There we
before
go.
you say that, 'cause we have two new members. So we read the title and put a motion on the floor, and then we discuss it. Then we'll, you want to make that motion, doesn't mean you're going to vote yes or no on it. Just gets it on the floor so we can have discussion.
This is ordinance 2019-15/LDR 19-06, amending section 4.2.5 and creating section 4.2.4.0 or .40 of the land development regulations to allow for fully enclosed small animal boarding facilities by special exception to agricultural zoning districts.
Okay, do we have a motion?
The motion.
So moved.
So moved.
Second. Okay, a motion and a second. On the floor for discussion, do we have a staff presentation?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do. Thank you. This was a staff-initiated project. Currently, if you look at the land development regulations for anything of the small animal boarding nature, kennel, that kind of thing, it all kind of gets lumped into one category. It's only allowed in two places in our code. Once we get through, the staff recommendation is to recommend approval of ordinance 2019-15 to the City Commission. So as I said, currently our regulations treat them all kind of the same, regardless of the actual structure and use of the facility. Right now, they're only allowed by right in commercial intensive zoning districts, and that, as you'll see, has to be a soundproof facility. Commercial intensive is going to be in the urban setting. It's going to be in town. It's not going to be out in the rural areas. It is allowed in agricultural zoning districts, but only by special exception. Whereas the CI allows for it if it's in a soundproof structure, the agricultural zoning district, regardless of the type of structure, allows only for facilities to be located at least 300 feet from the property line. And if you've got even a 5-acre parcel, that makes it hard to actually accommodate that, given the size of some of these facilities and how they're spread out. And so we discovered by talking with another one of these businesses that the county code actually allows for these facilities to be within 50 feet of the property line, provided that they're in climate-controlled enclosed facilities where you won't have the noise issues that you would otherwise have if it was an open kennel. So if you had a kennel that was under a pole barn but generally open to the outside, it could typically generate a lot of air if you had a lot of animals, whereas these enclosed structures tend to mitigate the vast majority of the noise problem for small animals. And so we brought the concept forward to the City Commission at the last meeting on May 28th and sought their direction whether they wanted to pursue this or not, and if so, under what conditions. And so the Commission directed staff to go ahead and draft an ordinance that would allow for small animal boarding facilities in the agricultural zoning district within 50 feet of the property line, given certain circumstances. It meets certain criteria. And they also said that they wanted to maintain the extra level of scrutiny in the permitting process. And so rather than allow these facilities to be located in agricultural zoning districts by right, they want to maintain the control and have them allowed only by special exception, which is a more intensive process. It comes back before the Planning and Zoning Board. It's quasi-judicial and has a higher level of standard for what has to be presented as part of the application. And so the ordinance, draft ordinance before you, it amends the code for the agricultural zoning district under the special exception section to allow for these facilities to be located within 50 feet of the property line, provided they meet certain specified criteria. The open air facility type of structures at kennels would still be required to meet at least the 300-foot setback line. That part did not change in this draft ordinance. And the code relative to commercial intensive was unchanged as well. We didn't make any amendments to that. And then we have added section 4.2.40 to the land development regulations. 4.2 is your supplemental district regulations. It's kind of a catch-all for a lot of different things, and so this added the specific criteria under which a facility could qualify, not guarantee them that they'd be permitted, but qualify for the special exception process to locate one of these facilities in the agricultural zoning district. And so just as an example, this would be sort of an example of an open air facility. The animals are always housed outside. The runs are all outside. The crates where they're housed are all outside. This is something that would still require a minimum of 300 feet from the property line to try to mitigate some of the noise issues. Facilities we're talking about, this would be an example of one. This is one that has actually been allowed by Alachua County in the unincorporated area. It's fully enclosed, climate controlled. There are, though, still a need to have some small outside areas where the animals do their business and gets cleaned up by staff later. But they don't. This is not the area where they spend the majority of their time. And in the evening hours, they're brought back into the inside, and they remain inside after, I believe the ordinance specifies after 9 o'clock. Another example of an interior sort of play area that the animals have between buildings. Again, the fact that it's between the buildings helps to mitigate a lot of the noise problem as well. And so you wouldn't have a play area like this for the animals outside of the buildings, but you could house it between the buildings to encapsulate the noise. Beg your pardon? That's for dogs, yes, sir. If you look at it from the air, it's a dog bone.
A better pool than you do.
It's really neat when you look at the aerial. It's a dog bone. And so that ends the staff presentation. We think that it would be a good idea. It's not something that's liable to generate noise issues, problems, if it's done according to the criteria that have been outlined in the proposed amendments.
I have a question. Does the city lose any control over signage requirements or building type requirements when it shifts from the commercial intensive zone into an agricultural zoning? Does the city still maintain the same control over signage requirements in that environment?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The city, none of the regulatory aspects in terms of the building, the type of structure would change. That all would essentially be the same.
Okay.
I want to know who will monitor this? I know about Pet Paradise because I've been in there, but I wouldn't want to have to monitor it. But is somebody in the city going to monitor it? And are we getting into puppy mill stuff? Are we going to be able to monitor that kind of activity?
Mr. Chair, the code that we proposed doesn't really have anything in it that would address a puppy mill issue. Kind of the flip side of that is the code that we currently have doesn't either. And so if that was something that looked like it was either likely to become an issue or we wanted to get ahead of it, we would need to study it a little bit and figure out ways to address it in the code to discourage it or outright prevent it. As it stands right now, the code we have, theoretically, I guess somebody could try to slip a puppy mill in under the existing code. Nothing in here really was contemplated to address that. So we could address that as a separate issue and come back again as well.
Mr. Chair. Go ahead. I think to answer your question, though, the city would absolutely monitor the setbacks and make sure that,
Yes.
that they were within the setback. So the part that this would, the part that before you tonight, the city would make sure that if it's open air, it's 300 feet. If it's completely enclosed, it's 50 feet. As to the puppy mills, I mean, I think that would fall under like an ASO regulation, Humane Society regulation. I think there's other avenues that if a puppy mill tried to open up as a kennel, pseudo kennel, I think you'd have other vehicles to go about addressing that. But the city would absolutely monitor the setbacks, which is the question before you tonight.
And as well, Mr. Chair, at least in terms of looking at life safety issues, the fire department does an annual inspection of pretty much all of our brick and mortar businesses just to make sure they're still maintaining compliance with whatever regulations they were passed under.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Jessica.
So, under the county ordinance as opposed to this one, are there, because I think this also goes to the puppy mill thing, are there restrictions on how many animals at any time these kennels can have? Or does that, I mean, I know ours has a 4-acre lot minimum, but is there a point at which they can't build it because it's out of code because of how many animals they plan to keep?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any limitation based on the number of animals. It's more based on the capacity of the facilities that are constructed. But certainly that could be an element of consideration during the special exception process when they come in with a application for a special exception. And that was, I'm sure, one of the considerations the commission had when they said we want to maintain the ultimate control of what gets permitted through special exception as opposed by right.
I have one more. Is the city at any income disadvantages in terms of taxes with the properties being located outside of a commercial intensive zone?
Mr. Chair, it all depends on the appraisal done by the property appraiser. It is still going to be appraised as a commercial endeavor. It's not going to, a facility like this does not maintain an agricultural property tax assessment. It would be assessed as a commercial.
And I would add that the ag exemption goes with what you do, not how you're zoned. There are some properties that are all platted out and zoned for residential, but the owner is still running cows on them, so he still gets his ag exemption until he begins to build on it. Other questions? So I guess what we have before us is that all we're saying is that we would allow an enclosed facility to be within 50 feet of the property line instead of 300 feet, which 300 feet is pretty draconian because I think an acre is about 300 feet on a side, isn't it? So if you have a 4-acre lot, there's no place on a 4-acre lot that would be more than 300 feet from the side. So that's a pretty draconian restriction. It sounds like one that the county would have. So I think 50 feet is reasonable for an enclosed facility. And if you want to have an open air facility, you'd have to have more than 4 acres because there's no way you can get 300 feet from each side on 4 acres. So that sounds good to me. I had a couple other questions. Several times we talk about veterinary facilities in here. 4.2.40 commercial kennels, veterinary clinics, and small animal boarding facilities. It seems like by this paragraph we're restricting veterinary clinics. We're putting them in the same category as boarding facilities and require them to be on 4 acres, which veterinary clinics, like we have a couple in town, they're on small lots. They're not, well, one of them's an agriculture, well, I don't guess that one's shut down, but in the past, we've had a small vet clinic on a small lot, and they do house a few animals, but they're not really like Pet Paradise where all they do is house animals. Are we pushing the veterinarians out of town that want to have a small vet clinic on a 1 acre lot?
Mr. Chair, the veterinarian clinic could go in pretty much any of our commercial zoning categories, and so in the urbanized area, it'd be wide open. They could go to almost any commercial, in fact, they could go to any commercial category we have.
But if they want to go in ag zone, like the one out on, used to be out on 26, now it's a car store, or RV storage area, but it used to be a vet clinic, he would no longer be allowed.
You bring up Mr. Chair, you bring up a very interesting point. It didn't actually occur to us when we were drafting this, but the original language we had cited veterinary clinics as part of the original language, and we didn't really pick up on the idea that you may have a fairly small facility for a veterinary's clinic, and the addition of the 4 acres could be limiting for a facility like that.
Could we take vet clinics out of there and just make this commercial kennels and small animal boarding facilities?
I think we could certainly strike that right out.
Go ahead, Jessica.
So then, because I just noticed this myself, so is this limited then to those on arterial highways?
Mr. Chair, we did include that as one of the limitations. We don't want, at least staff's opinion is that it wouldn't be conducive to the quality of the service to have these going down little private drives in the rural countryside. This is contemplating a more publicly facing and accessible type of commercial kennel and boarding facility. We wouldn't want to encourage a facility like this to be off of a readily accessible public highway, public conveyance.
So it excludes them, or they still could apply for a special exception under agricultural?
Mr. Chair, they would need to be on some sort of arterial highway.
What are the arterial highways in Newberry?
State Road 26, State Road 45, probably County Road 235 would qualify as an arterial of one form or another.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
does that,
Mr. Mayor.
it seems to me like that sort of speaks to these concerns about the puppy mill. If it's back in the woods, it turns into whatever I want it to be. If it's on a main road, people can see it. It's easy to find. I mean, in my mind, what kennels do is they allow people who are going out of town, who need to be able to find it easily, a place to leave their animal safely that they know is visible. So I'm not sure if that would help sort of address some of those concerns about the puppy mills and what would go on inside the business.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about puppy mills, and I'm glad we're keeping it as an exception. So each business will have to go through the vetting process through planning and zoning and the commission. But puppy mills are illegal in Florida, but in Ohio and Indiana, they're big business, and they breed the puppies up there. They ship them to Florida, and there's a lot of these outlets in South Florida that bring in these puppies, and they warehouse them in places that are usually illegal, but they're out in rural agricultural counties and kind of hidden away in closed facilities. Nobody knows what's going on in there. And then they issue them out 1 or 2 at a time to homeowners who sell them out the front door as pets. But in actuality, they were raised up in Ohio in a puppy mill, and a lot of the animals are sick and have been raised in very brutal conditions, and it's not something that's welcome in Florida, and it's something that if somebody wants to have a kennel, that we need to look very closely at. We welcome facilities like Pet Paradise that treat dogs better than they treat people. They're good neighbors, and we love to have them. But I think we need to be very cognizant of any new business that comes in and says they want a warehouse or they want a kennel dogs and cats in enclosed facilities. Because once they got an enclosed facility, you don't know what they're doing inside there, and we don't really have much reason to go inside and inspect them. Well, you mentioned the fire chief goes in there once a year, but still, they're hard to get rid of. We have several of them in Florida that they have had legal proceedings going on for years and years, and they can't get them out of their counties. Jessica.
On C, it says that it has to be located a minimum of 50 feet from any property line and 200 feet from any residential zoning district. What if there's a house on an agricultural that's adjacent to it? Would they have to abide by the 200-foot buffer since there's a residence there, or they're out of luck?
Well, Mr. Chair, they would, in a residence in agriculture would not be considered a residential district, but because it goes back before the Planning and Zoning Board and then the Commission, or excuse me, Board of Adjustment, as a special exception, the fact that there are residences in close proximity would definitely be one of the part of the analysis that staff would bring forward, as how far away it was from actual residences. And again, I know that was one of the factors that played into the Commission's desire to maintain the ability to approve these by special exception, so that on a case-by-case basis, they'd be able to evaluate the actual siting of the facility relative to the properties around it. Whereas if it had been done by right, then as long as they met certain criteria, they would go in. You really couldn't prevent them. So special exception gives the Board of Adjustment, City Commission, the latitude to do that.
I have another question,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair. As we're talking about this, I'm just curious, have we had businesses that are interested in this, or are we just trying to get ahead of the game?
Mr. Chair, both actually. We have a business that's interested in coming into the city of Newberry, but they want to make sure that if they're going to make that plunge, that they would be compliant with our code, but also to get ahead of it, to make it easier if a business that met all of those criteria wanted to come in, but they couldn't because of the 300-foot setback requirement. As the chair alluded to, in our code, you can't have a property that's more than 1-to-3 ratio in terms of width versus depth, and so 270 feet wide times 3 is that on the depth is a 5-acre parcel, and so if you had a 5-acre parcel, you couldn't actually locate one of these with a 300-foot setback because you don't have a 300-foot setback. Your setbacks would be on somebody else's property line, and so you'd have to either have a really wide piece of property on road frontage, or you'd have to have some other kind of you'd have to go somewhere else. This with the proper facilities allows them a lot more flexibility.
Questions? Well, I had a question for the attorney. In 4.2.40C, it says such animals shall be located a minimum of 50 feet from any property line and 200 feet from residential zoning district. Then you drop down to 10. The last sentence in 10 says commercial kennels meeting criteria listed above may be located within 50 feet of any property line. So does that conflict with the above sentence that says 200 feet from residential zoning district? One says it's got to be 200 feet if it's residential, and the other one says can be located within 50 feet of any adjacent property line.
I'm just rereading to make sure I answered correctly.
I would think that it doesn't declare as before. See if we can tighten that up as well.
So it's something we can tighten up to make sure
Okay.
that's clear
Okay.
about open air versus closed kennels.
Any other questions, comments? Now ready to vote? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 You gotta say it out loud, so everybody can hear.
4 ayes, motion carries unanimous. Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda, we're skipping C and D, is topics from members for discussion. Yes, ma'am. Oh, thank you for reminding me of that. This will be heard by the City Commission on June 24th, 2019.
And Mr. Chair, just to clarify, the motion that just passed, did that include or exclude veterinary clinics?
I think we're going to straighten, we're going to
Okay, I
strike
didn't
that
bring
out.
up the motion, so
We're
I
gonna
wasn't
strike
sure
out
if that was
veterinary
part of the
clinic.
motion. Okay.
Is that, everybody's okay with that? Okay. So we're down to item 8, topics from members for discussion. Anybody have any topics? Mr. Mayor?
Well, it occurred to me that it might be beneficial to have the HARB meet first when the HARB meets, because all 5 of the P&Z have to be here for the HARB. The 2 who have to be here for the HARB do not have to stay for the P&Z if they don't wish to stay. So the HARB doesn't meet every single time the P&Z meets, but when it does meet, maybe it might be nice to flip those agendas.
Everybody agreeable to that? Staff? Brian, in the future, can you put HARB first and then P&Z on the schedule? So if the HARB members don't want to stay for P&Z, they don't have to sit through it, the whole thing. Okay. In the past, we've had paper copies delivered to us. Is everybody okay with using the electronic version, except for if we have big charts? I think Brian said we're going to still deliver the paper copies to your house. But when we don't have any big charts, you okay with the electronic version? Okay. Any other comments?
So the packets will not be delivered? is what
Except,
we're saying.
except when we've got like a site plan where you've got the
Right.
18 by 32
But
things.
these packets like this will not be delivered.
Right. Is that okay? Can you?
Unless you want it.
No, I'm fine. I was just making sure. I have confidence.
Well, I mean, the city commission gets issued iPads and we don't. So you can't assume that everybody has got a computer at home and can print this stuff out. Okay. Any other comments? Okay, and we are adjourned, and we will, does anybody need a break, or can we go right into HARB? Okay. We'll give a minute for the HARB members to get situated.
Finally got Miss Peggy up here one way or the other.
Just not the way you were trying.
Janine, we ready to go? Okay. It is Monday, June 3rd, 2019, and this is a Historic Architectural Review Board meeting. Begin with a call to order, approval of the agenda, approval of the minutes of February 4th, announcements. In old business, we have a review of ordinance 2914. In new business, a welcome of new members, quarterly business, topics of members for discussion and adjournment. Do we have a motion to accept the agenda?
Motion approved.
And a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimous. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes of the February 14th meeting?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Any changes or exceptions?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve and a second. Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimous. Announcements. And I just wanted to, I'm going to go ahead and chair this meeting, but I assume that the HARB will have its own officers who may be separate from the Planning and Zoning Board, is the way I understand. Is that correct? So y'all should think, and next time let's have election of officers for HARB who could be different. In the past, the Planning and Zoning has been the HARB, so I think we assume that whoever the officers are would be the officers of both, but could be different, and we would welcome some new blood. Are there any? We got it. Yeah.
Be careful what you ask for.
And you know, they've got welcome new members after this, but let's go ahead and welcome our new members first. So, Naeem and Peggy, we're glad to have you with us. You bring some different skills to the table, which is something that we've been looking for. The experience in historic places, and we're glad to have that, and we're glad to have a little bit larger board. We're 7 members now, 7 voting members instead of 5. So we're happy to have you. Do you have any comments?
I'm eager. We'll find out.
Okay.
I wanted to say one thing.
Go ahead.
Welcoming new members. I did give you your manuals. I can explain them later. I also gave the brand new appointees blank form 1s. You can already fill one out. If you need any help with it, give me a call at the U.S. Schoolhouse, and I can help you with it. If you give it to me by close business Thursday, I can turn it in for you on Friday. They are legally due within 30 days of you being appointed, which was a week ago Monday, or a week ago Tuesday, because it's a holiday. So they are due to the state with a deadline. Okay? And I'm Janine, if you don't know that.
Yep.
I know I've met with Dr. Burke, just like that.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I just ask you to be cognizant of the Sunshine Law, that now that you're on a appointed board, we can't,
Talk to Jordan.
you can talk to Jordan or Janine, or Ryan, and the attorney, but we can't sit at the country kitchen and discuss planning or HARB
We can
issues.
talk the other stuff, though.
We can talk other stuff, yeah. So, anyway, welcome to the board. Okay, the item 5A, status update of review of ordinance 2019-14. We have a staff report on that.
Thank you. Technologically challenged.
As are we all.
Wendy Kinzer, Principal Planner for the City of Newberry. This item before you now is just to give you an update of the progress that we've made with the proposed amendments to the code regarding providing for an administrative approval process. As you know, the Historic Architecture Review Board had recommended before about wanting to streamline the process because it takes a while getting through the process for any building permit or a zoning process, and then this is an additional process. So these amendments have been proposed, and they're right now being taken through the process, the public hearing process. The first Planning and Zoning Board did hear the recommended changes to the code, and that was in the beginning of May. And then May 28th, the City Commission held their first of 2 required public hearings and approved on first reading the changes as presented in the ordinance. And then the City Commission's second public hearing is scheduled for June 10th, and at that time they can take action on the proposed ordinance. Background, as I said, the Historic Architecture Review Board was very interested in pursuing some kind of amendment, and that's because typically all the properties in the historic district, or unless you're also outside and individually designated as a local historic landmark, they have to go through a certificate of appropriateness process. And that addresses any changes to the exterior of a building or property that are visible to the public. And in that case, it would be required to be heard by the Historic Architectural Review Board. And most applications that have been heard over the past few years have typically been for more minor types of changes, such as going from shingle to metal roofs, using those types of materials, or we've had some changes that have been more major in the sense of a demolition, but those kinds of things would continue to come before the Historic Architectural Review Board. What's being proposed now is for these types of applications that are more minor, already consistent with the existing regulations as far as their the land development code and the zoning and building, and then they comply with the Florida vernacular style, and those kinds of things would be looked at in order to streamline that permitting process. The provision is proposed in the regulations to have the land development regulation administrator make those decisions and review such minor kinds of changes when people come forward with those things, such as building alterations, accessory structures, site work, that kind of thing. And then so those minor changes would be able to be looked at by your staff. And then, of course, if anything else, then it would still come before the Historic Architectural Review Board. And then if also in the event that there are any concerns about something, that would still come before you as well. The advantage of this, of course, is because it will shorten the overall process and the timeline that people have to go through to get their approvals for whatever work they're trying to do. So if it is straightforward in compliance generally with the regulations we have in place, then it can be looked at as an administrative certificate of appropriateness. The proposed changes that you have in your attached ordinance, the draft ordinance, is I think the proposed changes pretty much the opportunity to apply for an administrative approval certificate of appropriateness. And for that process, looking at section 11.11.3.1 does outline the types of uses that are considered minor that are provided in your draft ordinance. And of course, the administrator would make those decisions and is responsible for conducting that process. And then those actions that are ineligible, of course, have to go back through the board, as we said. There is also the provision for the rooftop solar panels that are already in the ordinance, and they go through an administrative approval process in the historic district, and that was a result of a requirement statewide. The applications that are denied by the LDRA, or if there was some concern about a particular application, or there was any question, then he can request that go ahead and be scheduled for the HARB. And then if the applicant is concerned about the decision made by the LDRA, that they can request as well that it come before the HARB. So there is that ability. And the types of changes that qualify for administrative review would be re-roofing, replacement of existing features, accessory structures, decks, fences, walls, driveways, walkways, paving, signs, as you can see on the list. In addition to those types of things, and there's criteria listed in your 11.11.3.1, and then in point 2, we have additional design criteria that the staff would have to consider in their review of these types of requests. And that's to make sure that they're consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of these Newberry's Vision sub-element in your comprehensive plan. And then also that's consistent with the Florida vernacular style, and of course with the Secretary of the Interior standards of rehabilitation. So it gives some kind of parameter, some kind of guidance for those types of reviews. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them for you.
Questions?
Just trying to, and this was just to kind of give an update and tell you what's going on, and any feedback that you do have, we certainly would appreciate.
So you'll have to excuse me if you guys have already gone through some of these. It sounds like the HARB has already reviewed this once before.
We have, and it's already actually been through the city commission for first reading, and
Right.
they're going to have their second reading later this month.
So if we can go back a few slides, or you don't have to go back, there was one that just, one of the staff's ability to approve just said building alterations. Is that language in the actual?
In your ordinance, it specifies, that's just,
Okay.
to summarize, but
So
specifically.
there's no language in here that's that vague? to
No,
just
no, sir,
allow
no.
any building alterations?
Mr. Chair, that you know that in the regulations, we tried to specify the types of uses, like it goes through it in that section, 11.11.3.1. It talks about the minor change
Right.
classification applies to following projects. It lists specifically re-roofing, replacement of existing
Right.
features, accessory structures, and goes through and gives a description and says what it is and what it isn't.
Okay, I just
Um,
wanted to confirm that there was no just building alterations category that was allowable.
Not just a general, just do what you want. No.
So 11.11.3.1, item A is re-roofing. So it allows the existing, if the material is similar to existing roofing or of metal materials, are there any color requirements that are prohibited in that metal roofing?
The city's code does not have specific color requirements adopted. It's based on a person's, what they present and how it works with the surrounding neighborhood, whether it's compatible or not, and consistent with the history of that area.
And
So,
will staff leave the building to go observe and make sure that a color that's proposed is matching to that neighborhood or to the area that the
yes,
historic
Mr.
property
Chair.
is in?
For an example, the Freemans, when we looked at they had a very large expanse for their roof that was being replaced. And some people were talking about, well, maybe just a big metal, basic, bright, shiny metal. And they said, oh, absolutely not, because of the large expanse. And then when you're driving down that road, there to that house, you'd have the sun because it's facing east-west. So all those considerations have to be
Okay.
incorporated. We may not be perfect, but it certainly, those things are considered.
But that's a good question.
Very good.
Because we're now trusting staff, empowering staff
That's
to
right.
make those decisions about, someone says, I want to put a purple metal roof on the historic house. They've got to either say yes, or it goes back to the HARB to make that decision. And we're trusting them that they will know the difference. They use the term vernacular a lot.
Yeah.
It is in the vernacular style of our historic buildings, so.
And Mr. Chair, you're right. It is a concern that, and that was one of the reasons when you all directed us to bring forward the amendment to the code, knowing that the city, the types of guidance that we have already and the types that the city is looking for without being overly intrusive to people's rights.
In the same section, just a few other items, and again, just for clarity, since this is the first time that I've had a chance to talk to you guys about it. Item C talks about pools and pool-screened enclosures, regardless of size, are eligible. Do those apply to only properties that have a pool present, or could someone apply for to enclose a front porch of a historic home in the historic district with screen? That would, in my opinion, change the appearance of the historic property.
If they were enclosing, if they're changing, if something changes the actual structure in a way that's not conforming, then it's going to be a different consideration and would come back to you. If it's changing something, so that it changes the actual appearance and the functionality of that building, it's different. But we would look to you for guidance, because if it were not straightforward and easily decided, and for example, if the screened-in area porch they wanted was an addition and clearly not seen, that they could make that much more hidden and it didn't interfere with the historic nature of that property, then that could be considered.
Okay.
If there was any question, we'd have to bring it forward.
Okay, and then to the next one, decks, the construction or removal of decks, provided the decks do not create a major alteration. Is that limited to side and rear decks, or can that be in addition to the front of a property?
It has to comply with the building regulations and with any code, any development process, the zoning regulations. This process that we have with the certificate of appropriateness is an addition to anything else, and so we don't typically allow those types of things in the front yard.
Okay.
They're within the side yard and the rear yard. If there was something special they were proposing or something and it was questionable and it wasn't consistent with what was already there, then we would bring it back before you.
Okay, and then my last one, I promise I'm done. Fences and walls, are there height restrictions on that ability? And again, front or side restrictions? I mean, can someone, a picket fence, in my opinion, is keeping in style, but, you know, a 6 or 8 foot board fence that creates privacy in the front of a property is not. I mean, what is the limitation on what staff can approve in that regard?
Well, again, it has to be consistent with our current regulations, with the code, the zoning code, and they do address some of the fencing and where you put it on the side within the, you know, its location. You're talking about height. There is a provision in our code dealing with signs, and
I believe height,
I'll just speak loud. Height, because I ran into this from my neighborhood. Anything over 6 feet, you're not an historic district. Huh? You're not a- No, but I mean, it's in accordance to the regulations, and the regulations state that anything higher than 6 feet would have to be wind, wind and all this stuff, and maximum.
Mr. Chair, just for some clarifications, specifically to fences. Fences in the front yard are pretty much limited to picket or a chain link style for visibility. There's actually in the code you can only put a impervious fence that you can't see through 2.5 feet above the center line of the road, and so you would actually draw a line, a straight line across with a level and see where that point is, and you could go to that point. The reason being for visibility to the house, to the structure for emergency services vehicles and such. So staff would not take the liberty to approve a fence or a wall that was in excess of what the code allows for. And then in addition, to your point, Mr. Urshad, the side and rear, you can go up to 6 feet. Anything over 6 feet requires engineering for wind load calculations per Florida Building Code, regardless of whether it's in the historic district or in any other area of the city.
Jordan?
I think everybody's a little, since this is definitely a test pilot, you know, we're out there on a limb trying to, and it was really a concept that this board brought forth and pushed for, and I think it's probably been a lot of instances, but I think the recent metal roof was the instance that really kind of focused everybody on this. And what happened was the person didn't know they were in a historic district or didn't know they needed a permit. I'm not really sure the back history, but they had the metal delivered, it's on the ground, ready to go, and, you know, somebody goes by and sees it and says, I'm sorry, you're in a historic district, you don't have a permit for this. And clearly a metal roof was probably more in keeping with the vernacular than the shingle roof, and it precipitated a conversation from this body that, you know, why can't we empower staff to do some of these no-brainer kinds of things? But the conversation that you guys have had is exactly the same as the conversation that the commission has had. I'll finish in just 1 second. Is exactly the same conversation that the commission has had. Is, you know, let's empower staff to do some very, very basic, what we hope are common sense decisions. What I would suggest to you guys, and I don't think that we made this suggestion to the commission, but we've done this in other initiatives, is have staff come back and do a presentation maybe in about 12 months and say, what kinds of things have you approved that didn't make it to us, and that way you can look and see the kinds of things without slowing the people down. I can tell you in my experience, staff is generally much more conservative than these bodies, so they're much more in keeping with vernacular. Generally the folks up here are, oh, purple sounds nice. These guys would say, I don't think they had purple in 1910, you know, or purple shingles. So, but that might be a suggestion to sort of waylay everyone's fears.
I have some questions or comments in the same category. David was talking about under replacement of existing features, where staff would be eligible to review and approve windows, doors, roofing, soffits, fascia, awnings, porch steps, railings, screening, or other enclosures, and architectural ornaments. And we're hitting here on some things that are really critical to maintaining the character of a particular dwelling. If you're going to change out the gingerbread on a Victorian house, then you're not staying with how the house ought to be. So,
Well-
yeah, that was my comment there, that I'm not sure all of those should be automatically done by staff. And then you had mentioned that if there was something that staff had approved that we thought perhaps should be reviewed, how do we know?
Mr. Chair, that was in reference to applications where an applicant applies and isn't satisfied with the response and wants to bring it before the HARB as well, or if the staff gets an application and it's not clear, that we want to bring it before the HARB as opposed.
But if it were the other way, where staff decided that that particular soffit could be removed or changed, how do we know that that's been approved, and if we would like to disagree with that decision?
Mr. Chair, the particular, for example, the replacement of existing features, specifically that section says that replacement of any original feature or of a contributing resource is discouraged unless warranted due to safety concerns or deterioration beyond repair, and in such cases of severe deterioration, replacement of the feature with in-kind or similar materials is permitted. And that's the only circumstance under which that kind of thing would be considered. So it's not changing.
And I read it, I read both that first part also. It wasn't necessarily attached to the second part.
They're in
I
this,
read it.
okay.
You're saying it is.
They're in, yes, it's part of the same paragraph, so. But that's, your point is well taken.
Good dialogue here. Anybody else have any comments?
Does it address new construction in the historic district at all, or how does that, is that part of the question?
The new construction, typically, the way this is written, these regulations are, taken as a result of looking at our own regulations and researching other places, what they're using and trying to make something fit for us. So it is all open for, discussion and change, and the city commission can certainly change something if they like. To your question, Mr. Chair, he asked, what did you ask now?
The answer is new construction
The
would
new
be too
construction.
complicated. It would fall into other categories. This is really just more standard things. If someone wants to build a new house in the historic
it's
district, they
gonna
would have
come.
to fall through a whole other set of processes.
But when you talk about a new, it could be a new fence or something, so that, that's new construction or something, but not for a structure. Yes, that would,
Being built in the historic district. And the line is gerrymandered around that lot.
You're fortunate.
Fortunate, yes, except that I bought it with the understanding it's in the historic district. So it's just confusion.
I have a question for this. So when it comes to replacing existing features, it says here in case of severe deterioration. I also saw it was like something about for safety. So yeah, unless warranted due to safety concern. What would you consider like a safety concern? Would it be something that the insurance, like a homeowner comes back saying, hey, my insurance company is saying I need to replace this? Is that enough for staff to say, go ahead and change it? Or do you guys go through a whole other, like how would you consider something being a safety concern? Does the fire have to approve that it's a safety concern? Is the insurance company enough to approve that it's a safety concern?
that's a good point. And anytime something like that is said, then we do have our building inspector and our fire chief. We have people that would just double check and look at it as well. It would be put on the inspection schedule to take a look at it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, that, in my mind, that contemplates situations, say, for instance, ADA compliance, if someone was to convert a historic structure into a bed and breakfast, for instance. There might be some structural modifications that have to be made to allow them to have that occupancy. So you might have to add a ramp or something like that to obtain your ADA compliance if you're going to be a publicly let out house, that kind of thing, or potentially. I do not anticipate that simply having an event that the insurance company says that you have to fix this, and it's more expensive to fix it in the vernacular that it was designed under versus changing the outward appearance. That would not be something that staff would typically consider signing off on. And there's a tremendous amount of guidance provided by the Secretary of the Interior's office on just about every facet of historic preservation. And so if there's ever any question, and we can find we'll do the research on that particular item, if it's a gray area, it's just going to come right back to the HARB for the HARB review. If it's cut and dried, then staff will probably take a stab at it. And if there's any, as the mayor alluded to, staff's going to be more conservative on these things probably than the board would be, because we're not. While this allows the land development administrator a certain latitude of discretion, we're not going to make policy decisions by interpreting anything outside of the established guidelines.
Others? Yeah, I think a lot of the issues we've discussed are things that require a permit to start with, and then a hard decision on top of that, re-roofing, changing your steps or your windows. And I think our intention was that people have already got a permit to put on their roof, and then they have to go through this long process of going through the HARB, which requires notice to be published in the local newspapers and the wait for a board meeting and getting the approval of the board. And we felt that a lot of them are pretty routine, and people shouldn't have to sit through a 2-month process. And it could be easily handled in, like, I think permitting is under your department, right? And they're over there in the little schoolhouse, so they can make the building permit decision and the historic review decision all in one little group, sitting around there deciding what can be done, and you walk out with your permit and not have to wait 2 or 3 months to get something which would probably just be a rubber stamp approval by us if the staff said we recommend approval. So kind of where we're at on that. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, well, that was just an information item. We don't need to vote on it. Like I say, it's already been through City Commission once. They're going to have a second reading. And I think staff just wanted everybody to be aware of it. And it did go, there were quite a few changes to the ordinance after planning and zoning, and so we get to see the changed version of it. So any other questions? And we'll move on to the next item. Welcome new members, which you've already done. Is there anything more that we need to do for our new members? Wendy or Janine, got your manuals. You know you need to make out your Form 11s or whatever they are. Okay. Topics from members for discussion? Anything? Okay. Then if there's nothing further, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Jordan, don't leave, I need to ask you something. And we don't have to be in the sunshine for this question.
Did you drive yourself here?
I did. I'm getting good at it. I'm just staying in Newberry. I saw Phil Parr today, and he was very impressed. And he said, "Wow, you've really come a long way." And I said, "Well, you know, you gave me those little packets of exercises